Maya Rodriguez stepped off the transport truck with a worn duffel bag slung over her shoulder. The morning sun stretched long shadows across the pristine concrete of Fort Blackstone's elite sniper academy, but the air carried no welcome. 12 men tracked her every step, their eyes sharp and dismissive, like predators circling a lone intruder. She could feel their silent judgment before the first word was spoken. Jake Morrison, known as Bullseye, was the first to make his disdain known. A decorated veteran of Afghanistan, his chest heavy with ribbons and his record boasting 47 confirmed kills. He carried himself with the authority of someone who had never been questioned. He glanced at his watch with exaggerated irritation and raised his voice. Great. Now the program will slow down for sensitivity training. His crew, Tommy Patterson, Rick Williams, and Marcus Chun erupted in laughter on cue. Their routine polished from years of shared contempt. Maya did not respond. Her dark eyes swept over them without hostility, filing away observations with the precision of someone who made a career of paying attention. Morrison's swagger showed comfort in his unchallenged throne. Patterson mirrored him with eagerness. Williams relied on sarcasm to survive, and Chun's sharp stare hinted at calculation rather than humor. They thought she was nothing more than a diversity experiment, and that misjudgment was her advantage. Colonel Hayes appeared, his reputation as a merciless instructor preceding him. His steel-gray eyes locked onto her and lingered in quiet disapproval. "You're late," he barked. Maya checked her watch and replied evenly. "Actually, see ya. I am 3 minutes early." His jaw tightened. "In my program, if you are not 50 minutes early, you are late. Drop and give me 50. She lowered her bag, assumed position, and began push-ups with fluid precision. Each repetition was steady, each breath under control. Patterson leaned close to Williams and whispered, mocking her perfect form. But her rhythm never faltered. When she rose, she did so without strain, eyes level, her body language offering no satisfaction to those waiting for weakness. Hayes gestured toward the rack. Rifle number 47. The weapon was scarred and weary. The scope bore scratches. The stock was faded, the metal etched with the wear of 3 deployments. To anyone else, it would be an insult. But Maya accepted it silently. Her fingers traced the imperfections, reading its history. Morrison smirked. "Don't worry, rookie. That rifle pulls left, and the scope is half broken. But hey, a real sniper adapts." His men laughed again, their chorus as predictable as sunrise. Maya felt the familiar weight in her hands. She remembered her days on the competition circuit, when she had no sponsors and used secondhand gear that barely held together. The rifle was not punishment. It was a reminder of what she already knew, that perfection rarely came from equipment. Hayes began his speech, walking the line like a performer on a stage. "This program separates warriors from wannabes. 90% of you will fail. The survivors will become the most lethal specialists alive." He spoke of mathematics, physics, psychology, the ability to wait hours without moving, and the discipline to fire once with certainty. Morrison asked about records with rehearsed confidence, drawing praise for his team's 3,400-meter shot on a moving target. The number rippled through the recruits with awe. Hayes mentioned a theoretical 4,900-meter marker, dismissed as impossible. To the group, it was trivia. To Maya, it was a challenge waiting to be solved. The day passed in assessments. Men whispered bets. Patterson said she would last 3 days at most. Williams predicted she would quit at the first live fire. They chuckled as if the verdict had already been written. Maya listened in silence while cleaning rifle number 47. Someone had switched her cleaning kit with one containing damaged brushes and contaminated oil. But she reached into her duffel for supplies she had hidden. She worked quietly, each movement deliberate. While Morrison watched with irritation, she had not complained. She had not failed. When the sun stood higher, slicing shadows across the immaculate range. Maya straightened from her task. The day's message was clear. She was not welcome, not respected, and not expected to endure, yet she had survived far worse in arenas where no one cheered and no one believed. Their attempts at dismissal felt familiar. Every sneer, every joke, every trick would become fuel. That night, in the stillness of her assigned barracks, she unpacked with steady hands. The duffel bag at her side symbolized all the times she had walked into spaces where she did not belong. On her nightstand rested her watch, the ticking reminder that discipline was often measured in seconds. As she reached for her alarm clock, she noticed it was silent. The batteries were gone. The first move had been made. They had already tried to set her up for failure before morning came. Maya leaned back against the thin mattress and allowed herself the faintest smile. She had expected this. In their eagerness to break her, they had revealed their fear. She closed her eyes, not worried about the morning. She had always woken before the alarm. Maya woke before the bugle, rising with the certainty of someone who no longer trusted alarms. The night before, she had found the batteries missing from her clock. The prank meant to make her stumble during morning formation. She had expected it and set her internal rhythm to wake at the same time she always did. Long before reveille, she folded her blanket with neat precision, checked rifle, number 47, and prepared for inspection. When Colonel Hayes walked the line, Patterson leaned close with a voice sweet as syrup and remarked that her rifle looked tired already. She did not answer. Hayes lifted her kit, frowned at the frayed brushes and the murky oil, and delivered a scathing remark about carelessness. Morrison stood behind him with his hands hooked in his belt and his smirk set for the audience. Maya knew the kit had been switched, but she refused to protest. She let Hayes's words hang in the air and took the reprimand without expression. The men chuckled quietly among themselves, pleased at how neatly the trick had landed. By mid-morning, the recruits gathered at the 800-meter range. The mountain valley was alive with thin gusts and bright heat shimmer. Patterson volunteered as spotter for Maya's first relay. He called out wind from the northwest at 8 knots with the steady voice of authority. Maya glanced at the flags and then at the grass. Bending opposite, she saw dust lifting in little spirals that told another story. She fired her first round, and the shot kicked dirt into the berm. The plate stayed silent. Patterson sighed with mock sympathy and told her to keep the rifle steady. Whispers rippled down the line. She adjusted, waited for the lull she had already noticed, and pressed the trigger. The second round touched the edge of the target, a scrape rather than a clean strike. It was still a hit, but the laughter at her expense had already spread. Morrison stepped forward when his turn came, his movements smooth and rehearsed. Every shot from his rifle struck center. Colonel Hayes praised the demonstration and told the others to watch his example. The comparison was deliberate, another way to isolate her. The second relay made the sabotage clearer. The ammunition issued to her felt uneven in weight, the cartridges too inconsistent to trust. She loaded anyway. The grouping scattered wildly, holes appearing across the target face with no pattern. To the casual eye, it looked like poor marksmanship. Patterson leaned near her ear and whispered that maybe the radio corps was hiring. She ignored him, breathed through her frustration, and logged the experience in memory. Morrison watched from a distance. No smile this time, only calculation. At the mess hall, the divide widened. When she carried her tray to a table, men shifted away by inches. Not openly hostile, only quietly ensuring they were not linked to failure. She ate without hurry, tasting little. Patterson imitated her first miss for an eager crowd, pretending to jerk the trigger and blow the shot. Morrison basked in the glow of his reputation. Colonel Hayes passed by and gave no acknowledgement. Maya kept her head level, finished her food, and left without a word. The afternoon brought another set of drills. Patterson again offered wind calls, each one carefully wrong. Morrison lingered near B, hand resting lightly on her platform. the vibration arriving at just the right moment to ruin a trigger pull. She missed once more. Hayes shook his head, marked his clipboard, and moved down the line. The lesson was sharp and public. She was the weak link. She refused to argue, knowing that words would serve as evidence against her. She focused on her breathing cycle, counting seconds, making the air her ally. She put her last round into the target's outer ring and stepped back with no reaction. By evening, the cantina was alive with Morrison's crew, their voices carrying stories of his perfect strings and her scattered shots. Maya did not go near them. Instead, she visited the armory and signed out a small box of match ammunition with her own pay. The clerk raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She carried the box out into the cooling air and walked to the darkened range. The stars were climbing above the valley, sharp and steady. The silence was a relief after a day of sneers. She spread her mat, laid the rifle across it, and opened her notebook. Inside were weather logs, sketches of wind cycles, and careful calculations of pressure and temperature. The pages were smudged with graphite and oil, the private record of a competitor who had trained herself to see what others overlooked. She dry-fired until the rifle aligned with her bones, until the sling hugged her arm the same way every time. She chambered one of the new rounds, read the shimmer of air, and fired. The plate answered with a clear metallic ring that carried across the empty range. She logged the shot, the temperature, the wind, and the time. Under the sky, away from the noise of the cantina, Her Isolation felt different. Here it was freedom, a chance to refine without interference. She studied the constellations the way she had studied grass and flags, reading their order in the vastness above. Hazing and sabotage had tried to paint her as incompetent. But the truth was clear. In the ringing steel, every attempt to break her would be converted into discipline. Every insult into a reminder that patience was the real weapon. She cleaned rifle number 47 with her own cloth, packed away the contaminated oil as evidence, and walked back to the barracks with her notebook under her arm. Inside, the room was dark. Her rivals already asleep. She checked the screws on her sling and the fasteners on her stock, subtle places someone might tamper without leaving a mark. She slid the notebook beneath her pillow and set her watch carefully, leaving the gutted alarm on the desk where it would be visible. Then she lay still, breathing steady. Knowing tomorrow would bring more tricks and more laughter, it no longer mattered. Each obstacle was another form of training, and she intended to use them all. The 1,000-meter qualification was always the divider, the distance where hopeful recruits discovered whether they belonged or not. The air above the valley carried shifting threads of wind, invisible currents that bent bullets like water pushing driftwood. Wooden platforms were arranged in a long line, each holding a rifle and a nervous shooter. The instructors walked the rear with clipboards, their eyes sharp for weakness. Maya Rodriguez carried rifle number 47 to her position. The weapon's scratched scope and worn stock had become familiar in her hands, its imperfections teaching her to compensate with focus rather than comfort. She laid it down and adjusted her sling with calm precision. Behind her, Jake Morrison strolled close enough for his words to land. 1,000 meters. Rookie, don't choke. Supply always needs clerks. His voice carried practiced ease, meant to rattle her before she fired. Patterson and Williams chuckled, feeding the pack's confidence. Maya ignored the noise. She stretched prone on the mat, pressed her cheek to the stock, and peered through the scope. The target was a pale square against the distant hillside, shimmering in the rising heat. Flags along the line flicked erratically, one pointing east, another west, none steady long enough to trust. Morrison spoke again, just loud enough for her to hear. Most people fold at this range. She shut her eyes briefly, inhaled slow, and exhaled slower. In her notebook, she had logged the valley's rhythm for days. Every 90 seconds, like the turn of a clock, the currents stilled. She chambered her first round, the The metallic click steadied her. She counted heartbeats, adjusted her breathing until it matched the rhythm of her body, and let the world narrow to a single point of focus. The lull arrived as she knew it would. She pressed the trigger with controlled pressure. The rifle cracked, sound rolling back from the mountains. For a heartbeat there was nothing. Then, the target quivered. The spotter's voice came over the radio, astonished. Dead center bullseye. Silence followed, stretching longer than the echo. Even Patterson stopped smirking. Recruits stared downrange as if disbelief might change the hole in the center. Colonel Hayes lowered his binoculars, his expression hard to read but no longer dismissive. Morrison's jaw tightened. He lifted his own scope and searched for some flaw, but the shot was undeniable. He tried to laugh it off. Pure luck. Blind squirrel finds a nut. The words fell flat, brittle, compared to the stunned stillness around him. Maya ejected the spent cartridge and let it drop onto the mat. The brass glinted in the sun, a tiny piece of truth no one could erase. She chambered another round, waited for the cycle, and fired again. This time the shot landed close to center, steady and precise. A third round followed, clipping the inner ring. The grouping was clean, disciplined, enough to prove the first shot had not been chance. When her relay ended, whispers rippled through the line. Not admiration yet, but recognition. She had delivered under pressure. The instructors exchanged quick glances. Some of the recruits who had bet on her failure shifted uneasily. Morrison moved to his lane and produced his usual flawless string. Every round center. His performance, a display of dominance. Hayes praised him loudly. Yet the sound of approval carried a thinner edge now, because perfection had just been shared. For the first time, someone else had touched the bullseye with the same calm authority. Maya gathered her gear with quiet hands. She picked up the first cartridge, still warm, and slipped it into her pocket. As she passed Morrison, he muttered, "Enjoy it while it lasts." His tone strained, the certainty cracked. She offered no reply, giving him nothing. That night in the barracks, she set the cartridge on her desk beside her notebook. The brass reflected lamplight, small but brilliant. She traced her notes from the weak wind cycles, pressure changes, intervals of silence, and felt vindication settle. The shot had been no accident. It had been preparation meeting patience. One moment of perfect stillness had carried her through the noise. She leaned back and let herself breathe. Tomorrow would bring more tricks, more sabotage, and louder efforts to drive her out. Morrison would redouble his attempts. Patterson would invent new jeers. Hayes would keep comparing her to tradition. But the sound of the plate ringing at 1,000 meters echoed inside her like a promise. She had earned her place on the line. It was only the first crack in the wall they had built around her. But it was enough. They no longer laughed with complete certainty. The predator's gaze had flickered. And Maya Rodriguez, calm and silent, as the night sky above the valley, knew she had begun to prove that she belonged. The advanced drill was announced on a morning, thick with tension. Each shooter would have 90 seconds to engage 5 targets, ranging from 800 to 2,400 meters. Hesitation meant elimination. Colonel Hayes's voice carried over the line, stripped of sympathy. Miss more than one, and you are finished. Morrison volunteered to go first. He moved to the line with the ease of a man stepping onto familiar ground. The platform creaked under his weight, but his stance was flawless. He cycled his bolt with rhythm, sighted, and fired. Each crack was followed by a clean clang of steel. The 800-meter target fell, then 1,200, then 1,600. His 2,000-meter shot was steady, and the final plate at 2,400 rang out near center. 73 seconds. A model performance. Hayes noted the time with satisfaction, and Morrison's crew erupted in cheers. Maya's turn followed. She carried rifle 47 to the mat and lowered herself into position. She let the noise fade and focused on her breathing. The timer buzzed. Her first shot at 800 was smooth, dead center. The second at 1200 struck true. She shifted to the 1600-meter plate, controlled her breath, and fired. Another hit, but as she transitioned to the 2000-meter target, she felt the platform tremble. A subtle weight shift behind her had sent a vibration through the wood. The shot went wide, dust kicking into the berm. The whisper of disbelief moved through the line. Patterson leaned on the rail, muttering something about nerves. Williams shook his head with false pity. She had only one target left. The farthest plate at 2400. A miss would mean failure and dismissal. Maya shut out the murmurs. She read the flags and the shimmer above the valley floor. The wind had picked up, sliding in unpredictable arcs. But her days of study whispered patterns others ignored. She slowed her breathing until her pulse dropped. The platform was still now. She pressed, broke the trigger, and sent the round across the distance. The spotter's call came after a breathless pause. Center mass hit. She had passed by the thinnest margin. Respect flickered in a few faces. But the instructor's eyes remained cautious. Hayes wrote her score with reluctance, giving no praise. Morrison's smirk returned, confident that her miss had cost her credibility. Yet the truth was there in the steel plate. She had endured sabotage and still walked away intact. That evening the mess hall buzzed louder than the day's gunfire. Morrison sat at the center table with his crew, retelling their latest triumph. He described in dramatic detail the 3,400-meter record shot his team had set, painting the picture of wind gusts, moving targets, and timing so perfect it seemed impossible. Laughter and admiration surrounded him. Every retelling polished his legend further. Maya sat alone at a corner table, eating quietly while the noise rolled over her. The clatter of trays and the roar of voices became a backdrop to her solitude. She listened, not to participate, but to understand. Pride hung heavy in the air. Morrison noticed her silence and saw an opportunity. He rose with his phone in hand, drawing the attention of half the hall. Well, our diversity hire squeaked through the drill today. He turned his screen for all to see, displaying the distant flag on the range map. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the 4,900-meter marker. No one has ever hit it. You know why? Because it is impossible. Physics itself says so. The hall quieted, eyes turning between him and Maya. He grinned. Why don't you show us what you're really made of tomorrow morning? In front of everyone? The trap was obvious. Failure at that range would humiliate her beyond repair. But Maya stood, leaving her tray neatly stacked. She met Morrison's stare, her voice steady. If I make the shot, you and your boys run the perimeter every morning for a week. In your underwear, rain or shine. The hall erupted with nervous laughter and shouts. Morrison's men looked uncertain, but his pride left no room to back down. And when you miss, he asked, voice raised, you pack your bags and disappear? Maya extended her hand. Deal. Her grip was steady, her eyes unwavering. For the first time, Morrison's smile faltered, just for a flicker, as doubt edged in. As she left the hall, the noise surged into chaos. Bets were placed. Arguments started. Opinions shouted. Outside, the night air was cool, the stars distant but clear. She let the noise fade behind her. The impossible shot was no longer theory. It was her next battlefield. Maya woke long before dawn, her body already tuned to the rhythm of the test ahead. The barracks was silent, but she moved quickly, gathering her notebook and walking across the base toward the weather station. Inside, fluorescent lights flickered above racks of instruments. Sergeant Kim Park looked up in surprise at the sight of her. Few recruits visited the station at this hour. Maya requested barometric readings, humidity levels, and thermal inversion charts for the valley over the past week. Park printed them without comment, and she spread the pages across a desk, marking cycles and gradients. The numbers whispered patterns she had already suspected. Around 8:30, the morning inversion would begin to break, creating a narrow window where air density would stabilize. She recorded everything into her notebook, pages already filled with graphs and scrawled calculations. The book had become her anchor. Each line of data, a weapon sharper than Morrison's swagger. While others relied on instinct or bravado, she relied on math and patience. She noted temperature drop rates, density shifts, and subtle wind arcs. The challenge was not impossible. It was simply untested. From the weather station, she walked to the armory as the doors opened. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, no relation but equally seasoned, unlocked the racks of precision rifles. Maya methodically examined each option, testing the bolts, inspecting barrels, checking twist rates. Some rifles gleamed with expensive optics and polished stocks, the kind Morrison's crew loved to brag about. She passed them over. What mattered was barrel harmonics, stability at extreme range, and a profile that matched her chosen ammunition. Finally, she selected a standard issue model, unremarkable in appearance, but reliable in its resonance. She adjusted the trigger pull, logged the measurements, and ignored the raised eyebrow of the sergeant. By the time she left, word had already spread. Whispers of the impossible attempt passed through the mess hall like wildfire. Betting pools formed in corners, with odds stacked against her. 300 men and women drifted toward the range. Curious, skeptical, some eager to see her fail. Morrison's crew arrived early, laughing at the sight of her chosen rifle. Patterson scoffed loud enough for nearby recruits to hear, "That thing is barely fit for qualification day." She didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she laid her notebook open on the bench, checked calculations against her weather printouts, and continued adjusting her scope. Colonel Hayes arrived next, his expression carved from stone. He reminded her in clipped tones that the facility would not be liable for damage. His words dripped with doubt, as though this were theater rather than training. She nodded respectfully and kept working. Soon after came Dr. Elizabeth Carter, the base's ballistics expert, holding a tablet filled with simulations. She announced flatly that the attempt was statistically impossible, even under perfect conditions. Bullet drop would exceed 60 feet, drift measured in yards, velocity bleeding away before impact. The math, she declared, did not allow success. Maya listened carefully, then pointed toward the valley. The sun was already beginning to warm the slopes, thin lines of shimmer rising in predictable waves. She explained that the thermal inversion would soon fracture, creating 3 distinct atmospheric layers. Each layer, if timed correctly, could stabilize rather than distort. Carter frowned, unconvinced, yet intrigued enough to watch. Morrison, standing nearby, laughed and told the crowd she was trying to reinvent physics. But his laughter was forced, his eyes betraying unease at her calm certainty. The range grew crowded. 300 spectators now ringed the firing line, filling the air with murmurs, wagers, and anticipation. Some leaned on fences, others stood on vehicles for a better view. The spectacle had become larger than training. It was pride, reputation, even myth in the making. The flag at 4,900 meters snapped faintly in the distance, a marker that had always been symbolic, never challenged. Maya ignored the voices, the shifting crowd, the weight of so many eyes. She placed her notebook beside the rifle, each page of scribbled graphs a reminder of the work that had carried her here. She loaded a single round, checked her sling, adjusted her cheek weld, and breathed slow. A round hair, the base, hummed with disbelief and excitement. But she was already sinking into silence. The expensive rifles gleamed untouched in the armory, but none of them mattered. What mattered was patience, calculation, and the quiet conviction that the impossible was only a problem no one else had cared to solve. She lowered her head to the stock, eyes on the distant speck of target, and waited for the valley to give her the opening she knew was coming. The range was wrapped in unnatural quiet. 300 spectators pressed in behind the barricades. Their laughter and chatter bled away, until even the sound of boots shifting on gravel seemed intrusive. Maya lay prone. The rifle settled into the cradle of her shoulder. The notebook rested open beside her, its pages fluttering faintly in the valley breeze. But she no longer needed to glance at the data. Every cycle, every shift in pressure and density, lived within her. She slowed her breathing until it matched the rhythm of her heartbeat, each inhale expanding against the earth, each exhale dissolving tension from her body. Through the scope, the distant marker was no more than a blur. She did not aim at it directly. Her reticle floated far above, offset by the calculations scrawled in her notes: elevation arcs, Coriolis drift, wind shear, velocity decay. At nearly 3 miles, the bullet's path was an equation of patience and faith. She let her eyelids droop, listening to the flags on the valley floor snap and soften, waiting for the inversion to fracture in the way she had predicted. Behind her, Morrison shifted uncomfortably. His crew had gone silent. The bravado drained from their smirks. Hayes stood further back, arms crossed, face carved from stone, yet eyes betraying the strain of expectation. "Doctor." Carter clutched her tablet, simulations looping in quiet defiance of what was about to unfold. The crowd held its breath. Maya's pulse slowed further. She counted at 1, 2, 3. The shimmer along the valley steadied. The thermal brake aligned. Her finger rested on the trigger. Pressure balanced. Not yet released. The rifle seemed to exhale with her, steel and flesh in synchrony. Then she squeezed. The crack of the shot split the silence. The muzzle jump was subtle. The recoil absorbed into the ground. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. The bullet tore into the air at over 2,800 feet per second, arcing impossibly high. Its velocity bled away. Fighting drag, losing more than half its speed before reaching the far layers. The Coriolis effect nudged it. The earth rotating beneath its path, thermal pockets carried it, slowed it, and then steadied it. Time itself seemed to dilate as 6 seconds stretched into an eternity. Every eye strained toward the horizon. Spotters tracked through high-power scopes, their voices caught in their throats. 7 seconds passed. Then, faint but undeniable, the target flag snapped once and stilled. A puff of dust leapt from the marker plate. "Impact bullseye," the spotter shouted, voice cracking through disbelief. The range erupted. Shouts, cheers, even curses of awe rolled like thunder. 300 people surged into chaos, some leaping onto benches, others slapping helmets in stunned celebration. Morrison's face collapsed into pale silence, his lips fumbling for excuses that would not come. Hayes, shaken despite himself, lowered his arms and gave the faintest nod of respect. "Doctor." Carter stared at her tablet as though it had betrayed her. Maya remained prone, unshaken by the storm around her. She cycled the bolt smoothly, the spent cartridge clinking onto the gravel beside her. The small brass case gleamed in the dust, no longer just metal, but proof of the impossible made real. She set the rifle safe, adjusted her sling, and finally sat up. Around her the noise surged higher, but within her there was only stillness. She looked once more through the shimmering valley at the distant flag. It had been nothing more than a symbol, an unreachable mark. Now it stood conquered. Yet she felt no surge of arrogance, no need for theatrics. She knew one shot, no matter how impossible, did not erase the long road ahead. Victory was never final. It was only earned in each moment of preparation, each breath of courage, each trigger squeezed at the right instant. The crowd might remember the roar, but Maya would always remember the silence before thunder. The valley was still echoing with cheers when Maya finally rose from the firing line. The cartridge casing lay on the gravel, already treated by the crowd like a relic. Spotters argued about angles. Junior soldiers replayed phone recordings, and the distant marker seemed larger than life now that it bore the scar of impact. The noise had shifted from disbelief to reverence, a current that swept through the base as if everyone had witnessed history. Morrison's crew tried to melt into the background, but the memory of their laughter before the shot hung heavy. Maya's voice, calm and almost amused, carried over the noise. "You remember the wager, don't you?" A ripple of laughter spread through the spectators. Not cruel, but sharp enough to draw every eye back to Morrison. His face flushed, pride collapsing into humiliation he could not mask. He nodded stiffly, unable to reconcile the loss with his reputation. Colonel Hayes stepped forward. "Yafset." For a long moment he said nothing, only studying her as though recalculating everything he thought he knew. At last, with visible reluctance giving way to honesty, he said, "I was wrong." The words were plain but heavy, carrying the respect of a commander forced to admit defeat. "If you'll have it, I want you as an instructor here." The crowd stilled again, absorbing the reversal. "Doctor." Carter approached quickly, clutching Maya's notebook as though it were contraband. Her eyes raced across the graphs and notes, disbelief turning to awe. "This is graduate-level atmospheric physics," she whispered. "How did you derive this without a supercomputer?" Maya only offered a faint smile. The notebook was her weapon, as surely as the rifle. When Hayes repeated his offer, Maya raised a condition. "I'll teach," she said evenly. "But Morrison's crew attends the first class. They'll need it more than anyone." Laughter rolled again, not jeering but cathartic. A release of tension into respect. Even Hayes allowed himself the shadow of a smile. As the sun cleared the horizon, the impossible shot was already becoming legend. Maya closed her notebook, her calm voice cutting through the fading clamor. "Impossible," she said, "is just another word for untested." 6 months later, the classroom carried a hum of focus that no firing range ever could. Charts lined the walls, detailing trajectories, atmospheric shifts, and ballistic harmonics. At the front, Maya stood beside a chalkboard crowded with equations, her voice steady, as she guided a new generation of snipers through the mathematics of uncertainty. Morrison and his crew sat near the front, no longer swaggering but intent, their notebooks filled with meticulous detail. What had begun as rivalry had transformed into discipline. On her desk rested the spent cartridge from that morning on the range, encased in glass. It was not a trophy, but a quiet reminder, proof that preparation could stretch further than pride. Morrison raised a hand, his question less challenge than curiosity. "How do you ever know you're ready for a shot like that?" Maya considered, before answering. "You don't." She said simply, "Certainty doesn't exist. Only preparation." And the decision to trust it. Heads nodded around the room. The lesson heavier than any bullet. Outside, beyond the base perimeter, the 400-meter marker still stood, preserved as both monument and lesson. Where once it had been dismissed as impossible, it was now a permanent reminder of what patience, science, and courage could achieve. On the wall above the classroom door hung a plaque with her words etched in steel. "The impossible is just another word for untested." As the students packed away their notes, Maya glanced through the window toward the distant marker. The wind shifted across the valley, bending the air in ways only she seemed to notice. Her legacy was no longer a single shot, but the quiet persistence of teaching others to see what others overlooked. The impossible had become inevitable.